Good morning, everyone. I've turned on my microphone. Hopefully you all can hear me. I'm Jennifer Pitzer. Thank you for joining our webinar. If you're not familiar with this Adobe Connect layout, you'll see a chat window on your screen, and you are welcome to type questions that you have in this chat window during the presentation. If you have any, I can try to answer them during the course of the presentation or also at the end. So there's a little example for you. And we'll go ahead and get started. Again, we are introducing to you, hopefully, our commercial property value forecast model. And what is innovative about our model? We develop it specifically for your community based on local data, and the underlying model can be updated on a 3-year cycle. It requires only minimal user input, so there's only a few very limited and easily obtainable pieces of data. I see we've got a couple of new joinees. Again, you can type questions in the chat window on the bottom of your screen. So again, it only requires a minimal amount of input from the end user. There's 2 sources of flexibility in this model for the user. The first is the ability to essentially force a current estimate. So because it relies on previous data, you can let the model give you an estimate for the current year's property value. Or if you are involved in some discussions or have some reason to believe, for instance, that property values are going to be 10% higher than they were last year, for example, you can tell the model what to use as a current year estimate, and it'll carry that estimate through the projections. The second source of flexibility in the model is an adjustment factor, and we'll go through an example of what that is later in the presentation. And you can use this to account for some out-of-trend changes that occur prior to updating the underlying variables in the model or recalibrating the model. And these 2 characteristics of the model allow the user to produce forecasts for a variety of conditions. So how does our model work? This is an example of the input screen, and you'll see that there are a few highlighted cells. The very first piece of information that the user needs to enter is the current year. After entering the current year, the model then requires that the total residential value in the taxing district and the total commercial value in the taxing districts are entered. In this example, for this model input screen, this is a community with 2 taxing districts. This is flexible for, of course, 1 taxing district up to multiple within your community. And these are the 2 essential pieces of information, the current year and the previous year, which will be the most recent available for total residential property value and total commercial value. As you see with this input screen, this is also focusing on an example in which there are predominantly TIF properties in the commercial districts. The model can be applied to commercial districts without TIF or TIF, so it's flexible in that regard as well. Finally, the user also needs to enter in any appropriate district details, and potentially there are up to 3 details that the user needs to enter. The first, of course, is the effective millage in each district. If there are TIF properties in the district, then we need to know what share of the property falls under the TIF. And then the adjustment factor that you see here, which is that second source of flexibility for the model that we mentioned at the top. And so now that you've seen the input in the model, the next few slides actually go through the output of the model. The model operates in an Excel platform, so it's very easy for most users, very user-friendly, being that familiar format. And here we again have an example built around multiple taxing districts, but this output has a parallel structure for as many taxing districts as are in your community. You'll see in the first column is the 2011 or the current year estimate. And what you'll notice here is there's a high and low estimate, and in this case both the high and low estimate are the same because we've forced that current year estimate in the model. If we did not force a current year estimate, enter a value for 2011 on the input screen, then the model would calculate an estimate and it would produce a high and low for the taxing districts. And so the first piece of information that the output will display is the total property value, the low estimate for total property value. If you have portions of your taxing district, your commercial property that are TIF'd, then the next piece of information is the estimate for the amount of the TIF, and then finally the TIF revenue. So if there are no TIFs in your district, of course, then we would see the total property revenue and then the total commercial tax revenue for the low estimate. And then likewise for the high estimate, we get the property value, the TIF value, and the TIF revenue. This model does produce a 10-year estimate. You're only seeing the first few years of the forecast here, but it creates a parallel structure, of course. And this output is customizable. Of course, if you only have one taxing district in your community, we can be flexible with this to best suit your needs. If you have multiple taxing districts, then we will aggregate to give you a total picture. So you're able to see the performance of individual districts and then also get a high and low estimate for your commercial properties in total. Finally, this second source of flexibility in the model is this ability to manipulate what we call the adjustment factor on the input screen. So again, the first source is the ability to force a current year estimate or tell the model that you think you know what property values in each of your districts will be this year, and then that estimate is carried through the 10-year forecast. Secondly, you can apply this adjustment factor. So in this case, we have 4 years of actual property value data, and these 4 years would be used to create the forecast. And if we update the data, tell it that the current year, for instance, is 2006, put in the 2005 values because this data goes from 2002 to 2005, our model would produce a baseline forecast that looks like this, which seems fairly reasonable given the past history. But of course, as forecasts rely on what happened in the past, it's very difficult for them to anticipate changes that deviate strongly from the past. Perhaps this is actually how reality manifests. So as we can see, if we get to 2006, we may see that the model produced what we would call a very conservative estimate of property values or property revenues, commercial property revenue, in 2006. Perhaps at this point, we think it's just something anomalous. We don't necessarily want to change the adjustment factor or generate a different prediction going forward. Maybe by the time we get to 2007 and we have another very conservative estimate, it's still prior to updating the underlying data in the model, but now we suspect that something structural has happened, and now the data from 2004 through 2005 is not necessarily sufficient to tell us what's going to happen moving forward. This is where the adjustment factor comes in. Using the same underlying data within the model, we can create an alternative forecast, and that's what this orange line is in this picture. So you can see that while relying on the same data, by the time we get to 2007, we can start to create a different forecast that more closely approximates what actually happened in this period. So the user can, in this way, create optimistic and pessimistic forecasts using the adjustment factor and the ability to force a current estimate. The adjustment factor can be positive or negative, which means that this model can produce stronger growth with a positive adjustment factor than it otherwise would. So as in this example, after 2005, clearly property values began to grow at a much faster rate than prior to that. If the adjustment factor is negative, that can produce decline in the growth rate. So if you suspect that perhaps your properties for some reason have hit a turning point and you're concerned that the tax revenue from your commercial properties in your taxing district will begin to fall, this model can account for that. So you can create a variety of scenarios with this model. Again, it only requires 3 pieces of information in order to produce the baseline estimate. You are able to, within the Excel format, archive your previous forecasts and actual values. So this allows you to track the performance of the model and can help inform you as to whether or not you want to apply the adjustment factor. And of course, our team will provide you with support in working through the model and understanding when to apply this adjustment factor and how, what values to put in for this adjustment factor. So the full product that we're offering is the customized forecast model, again, built specifically for your community. And we can also customize the output screen to meet your needs. And we also provide model documentation. We will also make presentations to your staff, community leaders, and stakeholders as necessary to explain the model, of course, train to use, provide ongoing support with updating the forecast input. As mentioned previously, we will also recalibrate the model on a 3-year cycle. That is an additional service. We have flexible pricing for this model. Depends on the number of taxing districts in your community, also the number of TIF districts in your community, the number of presentations that you may desire to your stakeholders and your leaders in your community. The pricing starts around $14,000, but again, this is flexible. We would want to schedule an in-person consultation with you, understand exactly what your needs are, and then we would finalize a quote after developing the scope of work. The updates on the 3-year cycle are priced separately. So again, this has been our presentation. My name is Jennifer Pitzer, and you are welcome to contact me with any questions. Again, you can chat any questions to me that you have in this chat window. Feel free to send me an email. If you have questions about this model or any of our other products and services, feel free to contact me or check our website. As you've seen, this model is flexible to TIF and non-TIF commercial properties. It could also be extended to residential properties if you had a need to know the residential tax base, residential property tax base. So there are possible expansions beyond this model, and we would love to sit down and talk with you and work with you to develop a product that best meets your needs. So again, feel free to send any questions. I'll be here for a few more minutes. If you have any, you can send them in the chat window. Otherwise, again, feel free to send me an email or a phone call or check our website. So thank you and have a great morning. Sure, we have a question about the adjustment factor. The adjustment factor appears on the input screen. It's one of the district details. I'll go back to that slide. Let's see here. Okay. So as you can see, the adjustment factor is the third line in the lighter shaded portion, which is the district details. And this is where you manipulate this value, if you will. Simply you enter in the number that seems appropriate, and we would work with you to help you determine what number will be appropriate to enter here. So this will either produce, as we said previously, the model is going to produce a baseline estimate. And the adjustment factor will allow you to either basically force the model to create stronger growth than it otherwise would, or even force the model to forecast property value decline in the growth rate of property values. And you are guided somewhat by archiving and tracking the forecasts. And of course, we also will work with you to help you judge when you would change this to produce a different forecast. This also allows you to produce multiple forecasts in a given year if you have a need to generate several scenarios. So you might want to change this adjustment factor if, as in the example that we went through, you start to see that the model, the baseline estimate for the model, is consistently producing estimates that strongly deviate from the actual value. So on this slide, the predicted revenues based on the historical data in the model, the underlying data in the model, are the pink line, In 1 year, you might see a deviation from the predicted to a certain amount. This is not unusual. If in the second year you see the same pattern, you might begin to expect that some underlying change has occurred that the baseline model can't account for. And so that's when you might want to consider using the adjustment factor. If you see a consistent underprediction or a consistent overprediction in the model prior to updating on the 3-year cycle. So again, if you have questions about our model, this is my contact information. As we mentioned at the top, this model relies on essentially 3 basic pieces of information that are needed to make it work: the current year and the last year's total residential property value and total commercial property value. And we, of course, would work with your team to make sure that you're comfortable pulling that information. It's publicly available information. The model output can be customized to meet your needs. Of course, this is the basic output structure. It can function for multiple taxing districts or a single taxing district. It's appropriate for commercial properties that are TIFed and also those that are non-TIFed. Produces an aggregate estimate in each taxing district, high and low estimates. Could be expanded to residential property value estimates if that would be appropriate for your community as well. And it has these 2 sources of flexibility: the ability to force a current estimate rather than simply relying on the model to generate one, and this adjustment factor that allows you to produce various forecasts with the same underlying data. Are there any other questions? Thanks very much for joining our webinar, and feel free to contact me again with any questions about this or any of our other research or consulting services and products, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.